With degrees in criminal justice and ethics, over 30 years of investigative experience, a recognized expert in investigation procedures, and an expert in criminal and social behaviors, I am Rick Decker, and this is A Shadow of Truth. Greetings from sunny Charleston, South Carolina. I am Rick Decker. So when I started this podcast, in the first show, I stated that I would remain true to myself, and if I don't stay true to who I am and my opinions, I will have lost myself and my honor. And for that being said, I need to talk to you today about Kyle Rittenhouse. Now, this is going to be in a very opinionated show, but here we are again. I've talked about this before, and I'm going to talk about it again because it needs to be said. But before I get to the meat and the potatoes of what's going on with Kyle, let me make my opinion very clear. And I'm just going to put this out here that people that go out and destroy property under the pretense of a peaceful demonstration are nothing more than homegrown terrorists and opportunists that hide behind an ideology of equality to perpetuate violence and the destruction of a society. These groups over the last few years have destroyed communities, businesses, and lives. The lives that were predominantly impacted were those of Black-owned businesses, people who were struggling to feed their families, minorities, and these people were already having troubles because of real social issues in these countries, in our country. And these protesters, in my opinion, are nothing more than terrorists. And they've run into these areas that they've selected and took money and honor and pride away from an already disadvantaged population and making them their lives less fruitful and more problematic. Because truth be told, ladies and gentlemen, when this crap happens, insurance doesn't usually pay for something like this. And also, to be honest, some businesses can't afford insurance, so they don't have it. So the impact is total financial loss. Now, I grew up in an area of impoverished people. I wasn't born rich, and my neighbors and friends were all people of color. None of us had anything. We were struggling to make ends meet. I understand what that's like. And these people that run into these communities with the pretense of, oh, it's equality, but they burn, pillage, and steal, those people are nothing more than coward and terrorists, in my opinion. So let me get into the meat and potato things today of Kyle Rittenhouse and the trial. So just a refresher, we have a young man in Kenosha, Wisconsin, Kyle Rittenhouse, that showed up from Antioch, Illinois with a rifle in hand to protect the city of Kenosha with other members during these riots and the destruction of that community. So this ad hoc group shows up in Kenosha to protect the citizens. The irony here is that this so-called militia was called a white nationalist group. Now, it was led by Proud Boys, and people were saying that this group, particularly the Proud Boys, were fascist neo-Nazi connected. They were racist. And I've got a news bulletin for you. The leader of the Proud Boys is African American. He's also a Republican. So I understand why demonstrators were saying that he was a fascist and a white supremacist because his Republican views disagreed with their agenda. Now, I'm not making this show about politics, so don't get that in your head, but you're going to hear what you want to hear anyway. So, what I'm trying to point out to you is the truth of the situation. Ergo, the name of the show, A Shadow of Truth. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I have studied white supremacist groups. I have been a bodyguard to authors that have went to Klan rallies, and I have personally known and defended Ken Peterson out of Janesville, Wisconsin. He was the Grand Wizard that brought the largest factions of Ku Klux Klan white supremacists together in the history of white supremacy. And in order for you to be part of the neo-Nazi movement or white supremacist groups, you have to be Anglo, pure Anglo, not Latino, not black, not Asian, but white. You cannot be a Latino or African American or anything else, Indian, to be associated with that group. So for people to come out there and say, well, Proud Boys is a fascist, neo Nazi, white supremacist group, they are talking out their ass because they don't understand the true concept of white supremacy. See, people get called racist and white supremacists all the time in this society because people, that's the thing that they go to. They think that that's going to stop you. Hell, I myself honked at a lady one time just 2 years ago, and she was backing out and almost hit my car, and I honked, and she got out and called me a racist and said I was white privileged. So it was because I was trying to stop her from being in an accident. Anyway, let me get back on track here. We're going to talk about Kyle. All right. Agree or disagree with me. This all fits in to what we're talking about. So, this militia was summoned by a councilman at the time by the name of Matheson. Now, Matheson himself wrote an email and had indicated that the citizens he was mustering together were a group of mixed citizens, men of color, Latino, and white males, mixed members of society. And in fact, he made this invitation on Facebook, and the email that he sent was to the mayor saying, as you know, I am the commander of the Kenosha Guard, the local militia. We are mobilizing tonight. I have about 3,000 RSVPs out there. So we see it as we are going to protect the city of Kenosha. So we have an authoritative figure, a councilman, that takes it upon himself to protect the city that he is a councilman for against the rioters that were scheduled to come into the city of Kenosha. Now, if you want to check my sources, this was in Reuters, October 2021, in an article by the name of authored by Brad Brooks, just if you want to check my sources. Nevertheless, the militia was comprised of a mixed group of ordinary citizens. So the authorities can't say that they were unaware that this was going to happen. They were told, and it was on public view in Facebook. It wasn't a private group from what I can see or from what I understand. So the thing here that I see that's going on from a criminal defense standpoint and as a criminologist is that Mr. Rittenhouse is nothing more than a scapegoat. I think if the state of Wisconsin really was interested in prosecuting people, they would not only prosecute Mr. Rittenhouse for shooting these individuals, but they would also start trying to prosecute other people that were part of the militia, but they're not. They singled out only Mr. Rittenhouse. Now, the thing to remember is that here was a poor kid, 17 years old. Well, I don't feel real sorry for him, but anyway, we have a 17-year-old kid that put himself into a urban combat situation that got backed into a corner and felt threatened. I've seen the video, and if I remember right, there was some exchange of yelling for help, and I could tell nobody really came to his aid. So he shoots these two protesters and puts the rifle off to a side and starts to render aid. Now, intent to kill somebody, you don't stop to render aid, and this young man did stop to render aid. He took his assignment seriously because his commander, the city councilman, had brought these people in to protect the city of Kenosha. Now, we all know that I'm not an attorney, but I have extensive investigative background, and the majority of that has been in criminal defense. So, where's the mens rea, the intent? Mens rea is the Latin word for the intent and the knowledge of doing what one's doing constitutes a crime and is wrong. I don't think Mr. Rittenhouse understood that there was a criminal act here because he was sanctioned by a so-called commander, which was a city councilman, to come protect the city of Kenosha. Hell, for God's sake, in the aftermath, law enforcement gave these militia water, thanked them, and said they appreciated their support. So why would Kyle think that he had done anything wrong at all? So on this ground, I really don't think you can constitute a solid explanation of mens rea and an expectation of prosecution on his actions. Rittenhouse, his intent, in my opinion, based off the invitation and the people of authority that were communicating with the group, was a point of defense to defend the city and protect the city by the request of a government official. Now, at this point, I've got to say, and I've said it earlier, I don't think that Mr. Rittenhouse should get away scot-free, but I do think a charge of involuntary manslaughter would be appropriate, not murder, however, because there has to be some accountability. This falls into borderline vigilantism, but one has to argue it was sanctioned vigilantism by a former city council member. So the question would be, what authority did that individual have to institute such a militia, if any? Remember, in an email, he called himself the commander. I think the state has the wrong person on trial here. If Councilman Matheson was seen as the commander of this group, it means it was structured with expectations and consequences of not following orders. The commander is responsible for his troops' actions. I'm a soldier. All veterans will tell you their commander is ultimately responsible for the orders that are handed down. I believe accountability falls on Mr. Matheson, not Mr. Rittenhouse. Yet Matheson has only been party of civil litigation. I would argue that since he summoned the militia, he and he alone is accountable for the murder of those participants of those riots, even though he didn't pull the trigger. Because if he did not summons them to mass, this would not have happened. There is a debate on the concept of organized militia under the Constitution. Now, I am not a constitutional scholar. However, the framers of the Constitution were a bit more moralistic than what we are today. Their intent was clear for us to be protected from tyrannical takeover and have the right to protect personal property. According to the Constitutionalists, an organized militia is to be sanctioned by state governments and be well regulated. Well, the National Guard in their mind, is that trained organized militia, according to constitutionalists. Now, the non-formal assembly by private citizens is not considered a trained and organized militia. On the other side of this coin, somebody could still argue, a good litigator could argue that, in my mind, that the National Guard is still an arm of a tyrannical controlled government, because ultimately the governor is in command of the National Guard. And when the National Guard is put into active duty, when they leave the state soil, they're under the commander in chief, POTUS, of the United States. So, in an offset, screwy, tin hat way, they are still part of the tyrannical control. Now, in this situation with Rittenhouse, if I remember right, the National Guard either was called in or couldn't be activated for whatever reason. But nevertheless, there wasn't enough law enforcement and there wasn't enough support from the Guard. People were outnumbered. Citizens' lives were at stake, as well as their property and their business. So, with that, I ponder, does the city government have the right to enact a militia in its own defense, where law enforcement and other additional resources are inadequate? It's because of this citizens militia was not really regulated. They had a self-appointed commander. So from that standpoint, since it was a city official, would a reasonable individual feel that they had been sanctioned by the proper authority to come help and defend an area? Remember, the government officials were put on alert. They knew that these people were coming, but yet nobody stopped the assembly. Nobody said anything. In all my research, I did not find one resource that said these people were told not to come. In the aftermath of everything, one sheriff was asked, if he had deputized these people, and he's like, "Oh, hell no, I wouldn't deputize anybody, because these groups don't actually help law enforcement," is what he said. But my question is why were your officers out there giving these people water and thanking them for being there if they weren't sanctioned to be there in the first damn place? See, what I think is going on here, and I hate to say this, but Sheriff, I think you're just trying to cover your ass. The city of Chicago reported in a news channel, one of their, I think it was Channel 4, I'm not really sure on that, out of Chicago, that said that the chief of police of Kenosha knew. Emails were sent to local law enforcement saying the city councilman had invited them and they planned to mobilize on Tuesday night. Now, this was emails sent from the so-called militia to the proper authorities, and nothing was done to hinder that assembly. So at this point in my mind, this whole trial raises more questions than it does answers. And I can't think of any reason where I would think that this trial is a search for justice for these men that were shot. Now, these people that Mr. Rittenhouse shot were not novices of the law and the consequences, because between the two of them, one was a pedophile, an arsonist. In fact, the one guy had started dumpster fire that night. And as a fire investigator, I'm telling you, an intentional fire in a dumpster on something like that is arson. The other one was convicted of burglary and robbery. They were violent in nature. And I know it's said a lot of times, from the public, sadly, they say, well, when an officer is killed, they knew the risks when they took the job. Well, criminals know the risk when they commit the act. So I don't feel sorry for these guys that got killed because they were not going with the intent of peace and justice. They were going to pillage, rob, and destroy. A lot of things go on for a trial. And one of the things that caught my eye about this case is the judge. The judge was firm with the prosecution that the prosecution is not allowed to identify the individuals that Mr. Rittenhouse shot as victims. This is nothing new for that judge. His rationale was that Mr. Rittenhouse has not yet been convicted, so they're not victims. Well, and he's done this in sex assault trials and other type trials, and I kind of disagree with him. You know, if you're minimizing the label on the victimization, in my mind, it's just playing semantics. However, the other side of this coin is that the defense is allowed to call them as they were arsonists, rioters, and thieves. And a lot of people say, well, this is a good advantage for the defense. I disagree respectfully. I think if the defense uses these labels where the prosecution cannot, the juries are smart. They're not stupid. They will see or feel that they're being played. And I personally think that if the defense is allowed to use labels and the prosecution isn't, this is setting the case up for an appeal because one could say that the judge is biased by allowing the defense to label these individuals in a negative manner, but not allow the prosecution to use what is normally an appropriate label in this type of scenario. Look, this whole thing has been a political hot button since the damn day it happened. It was a sad situation all the way around. I don't think those men deserve to lose their lives, but at the same time, it's just a cluster mess. Okay. They knew the consequences that could happen when you go out. I mean, when I go to a fire, even though I don't go in until after the fire's put out, there is risk that I take, and I'm well aware of the risks. When a bad guy goes out and commits a crime, when somebody loots and pillages and steals, they know that there's risk, but they let their personal benefit outweigh those risks and they go do what they're going to do anyway. So at that, they've accepted those risks. See, what happens is, like anything else in our society, this has been over politicized, and people that want to terrorize our country want you to think that they are the victims and that they are just trying to protect you when they're really and your rights, and they're just really trying to destroy a community and not be held accountable for their actions because they feel that they're more right than what the law prevails for. I think accountability needs to be held, and I think the accountability is being pushed onto the wrong individual. It needs to be pushed on former Councilman Mathewson. He's been sued. The police department have been sued. The officials have lost their jobs. Good, because nobody tried to stop this militia. They did not do their due diligence to protect and serve according to the constitutional laws of this country. They let vigilantism run amok. And with that, remember that Rittenhouse and these other people responded to a request for help from a city under siege that had already experienced destruction and looting and public unrest because a young man of color was killed by a police officer and all hell just broke loose. The rioters had massed together quickly and had infected and started destroying this city. Like the militia, the rioters, some of those people were not members of that community. They came in from far away to take from people that would not have an impact on their lives. When rioters come into a community like this, they are instigators with they come with the sole purpose of causing chaos, mayhem, and harm. I'm not saying, and if I've said it once, I've said it a couple times, that Rittenhouse was a hero or any of these other people were heroes. But what I am saying, they were patriots at the time. They took a stand when nobody else would take a stand. They answered a call from someone they perceived as a commander to stop a protest, loss of property, loss of civility within a community. They're going to have experts that are going to be limited to testify in this trial. There's already an expert that is being blocked by the prosecution of what he can and can't say, and I'm sure there's going to be an expert on the defense side. No, wait a minute, I'm wrong. The one expert was the one that was going to be called by the defense, and the prosecution has successfully limited what they're going to be able to say or not say. So that's the only expert for as far as the videos go, and what could tell what really happened is going to be talked about and seen during the trial. Ladies and gentlemen, our system is not built on vigilantism. Law is meant to be based on fact and not political retribution. And this trial is not based on fact. It is motivated by political retribution by the left. It is taking a young man and making him the poster child, an example to others to stand up and protect what's yours and what you believe to be constitutionally right. It is just a reason to perpetuate further harm and discourse to America. We are not here today on the show to say that I am unequivocally right or that I am even wrong. What I'm here on the show for today is to bring you another side of the story, like a Paul Harvey event. Look at all sides of what is happening around you. Look at beyond, think outside the box. This could happen in your community, and this could be your child. This could be your business that you lost. This could be you. It could be you that will be getting railroaded into oblivion for a political agenda if we don't, as citizens, stop and say, what do we believe in? What is correct? What is not correct? And that's something for each side to answer, each person, because everybody has a right to their own opinion. I used to tell my detectives, follow the evidence because the evidence will set you free. There are four sides of every story. There's the prosecution side and the victim side, and then there's the defense side, and then there's what really happened. And somewhere in the middle is the truth, because the truth converges based off of all the lies. Do you know who wins trials? The best liar, the best lawyer that can make the jury believe their story is right, regardless if it lines up with the evidence. Because so many times today, you want to know the reason why I got out of criminal defense, ladies and gentlemen? I will tell you. They started stacking charges, manipulating the evidence, because what they were interested in were conviction rates and staying in office. And they went from a rehabilitative society and rehabilitative system to a retributive system. baseball sentencing happened. People have charges stacked up against them, and prosecutors know they cannot get out of it, and they do it on purpose so that their conviction rates go up, and they don't have to worry about giving somebody anger management treatment, drug and alcohol treatment. They just put you away or off the street. Okay, this is my time, and I know this has been a long show. I want to thank you for listening. For crying out loud, please email me at a shadow of truth podcast@gmail.com with your comments, questions. I don't care if you write me and tell me, Rick, you're full of crap. At least it's a comment and it gives me feedback. Also, if you go to the site, my website, on Simplecast, which is in your description below, there's merchandise that is available that you can buy. All merchandise and donations made to the show are used to um, progress the show in research and time and production. So it's not going to line anybody's pocket. So thank you for listening. Until next time, please let's take care of one another. Carpe diem. Hey, before we go here, I just wanted to remind you that if you can, to remember your first responders in your area. I know that in my area, the last show I had talked about donating money to the department, Whitesville Fire Department, but it has come to my attention that Dalton Fire Department has created a benevolent fund because some of their firefighters are sick and some are behind on bills and have extreme medical issues. And Dalton Fire Department has created a benevolent fund, and they've asked me to let you guys know that they are in need. These firefighters down there need help, and you can send anything that you could send to the Dalton Fire Department. Attention, Douglas Kearns at 404 School Street, Dalton, Georgia 30721. All donations are tax deductible. Thanks for listening, and please, let's take care of one another. Until next time, thank you.